Ciao! Welcome to a new lesson. I'm Giulia and today we talk about white balance and color temperature. Let's dive in. Understanding white balance and color temperature is really important for your photography. Let's see why. Every light source emits light with a different color temperature. The white balance makes sure that the white is really white and that your colors are as realistic as possible. What does it mean? Every light source, the sun, a light bulb, neon lights, flash, they all emit a different light with a different color. Like literally it has a different color and you can see it in everyday life. So for example, at sunset, you might have noticed how everything turns golden and has that beautiful warm hue, while on an overcast day when it's cloudy and gloomy, everything's bluish and like, ooh, grayish. While if you shoot with flash, you will notice that the light that flash emits is quite balanced. It's like white. But let's understand this in more details. So first we need to understand what color temperature is. As we mentioned, color temperature is the color of the light and it's measured in kelvins or K. Different sources have different color temperatures, but not only that, also different light conditions have different color temperatures. For example, the light that's coming from the sun has a different color than the light that's coming from a light bulb or from a neon lamp. However, if we take the same light source, for example, the sun, even the sun has different color temperatures based on the light conditions. If there's a cloud in front of the sun, the color temperature changes. Or if it's the light of sunset instead of the light of midday, that also changes the color temperature. So color temperature is very variable and we'll look at exactly what the color temperature are. So here I put together a chart for you that describes exactly the color temperatures and what color each light source has. So on the very left, we have the more orange, the warmer tones of light, and then they go lighter and lighter until we have a neutral color temperature, and then they go on the right towards the light blue and dark blue hues of the spectrum. So lower numbers equal a warmer light. So candlelight is one of the warmest light sources and it's at around 2000 Kelvin. The sunrise and sunset, again, the golden hour, you will know that it's called the golden hour for a reason, and it's because the color temperature is very warm and it's anything between 2000 and 2500 Kelvin. Then we go towards more light warm, which is like a light bulb, or what's called tungsten as well, which is around 3500 Kelvin. Then we have the morning afternoon light, so that's around 4500 Kelvin. And we are starting to get closer to what's called daylight, which is the most balanced of lights in terms of color. And as you can see here is white. That light has a color temperature between 5000 and 6000. The light sources that give us this kind of neutral colored light are flash or the daylight from noon. The sun at midday emits a natural colored, neutral colored light as neutral as flash. So flash has a color temperature of around 5500. Then if we move towards the cooler side of the spectrum, the cooler side, then we have fluorescent light, which is around 7000 Kelvin. A cloudy day, cloudy and overcast days, I put it here between 6000 and 7000, but it depends on the thickness of the clouds. They can really get over to 8000 Kelvin easily as well. So cloudy from 6,500 and up. So anything towards the more blue side of the spectrum. And then we have the shade. So daylight in the shade. That also gives us a very cool light color. Now, color temperature and white balance are actually two different things, and they're often confused by photographers, but let me explain the difference. So we've learned what color temperature is. White balance, basically, it adds the opposite color of the spectrum to bring the white back to neutral. So it's not white color, so white balance and color temperature are not exactly the same thing. White balance is what is used to balance color temperature. By adding the opposite color, white balance helps you remove color casts, and it helps you balance the color and give realistic colors. So it makes sure that the white that you see in your image is really white and it's not like yellowish or bluish or grayish. White needs to be white. And this is especially important in food photography because having realistic colors stimulates a part in our brain that stimulates appetite. So by using realistic colors, what we're doing is actually we're stimulating appetite in our viewer, therefore making our photos more effective. Because if the colors are not realistic, the viewer doesn't get as hungry, and therefore our photos don't have as much impact. So having realistic colors is very, very important in food photography. So here's a visual example of the difference between white balance and color temperature. So here is the color temperature chart that we saw in the previous slide. And as you can see, the warmer tones are towards the left of the scale, while the blue tones are towards the right of the scale. These are two screenshots from Lightroom, which is the raw developing app. And as you can see, the color temperature slider here is the opposite. So it's got the warmer tones on the right and the cooler tones on the left. Why is that? Because as we said, white balance just adds the opposite color in order to balance the scale. So if we have, for example, the shade white balance, the color temperature is around 7,500, which is kind of like close enough to our white balance, to our color temperature scale. So the shade is over here. Light that's coming from a place in the shade has a blue cast. So what happens is that in order to balance the colors, we have to add more yellow. And that's why 7,500 in color temperature is on the yellow side of the slider. Vice versa, the tungsten, which is basically the light bulb, has a color temperature of 2850 Kelvin. So again, pretty close to, the range here in the color temperature scale. However, you will see that the slider here is super blue because basically when you shoot with a light bulb, the light that you capture will have an orange color. So in order to balance that orange color, we have to add blue to it to bring the white back to white. Here is a visual example with photos. So I shot these two photos like literally 5 minutes apart, and this is because thanks to London weather this was not really a cloudy day, it was a sunny day with some clouds. So basically this one I shot while a cloud was in front of the sun. So you will see that the light is a lot softer and the shadows are not as sharp as these ones. This other image that was shot with direct sunlight. So here in the image on the right, the cloud moved away from the sun for like 2 minutes, and it allowed me to shoot this other image of the same subject, but apart from the lighting style, Let's look at just the colors. So on an overcast day, meaning with clouds in front of the sun, the light that comes from cloudy days and overcast day is very blue, very, very blue. So in order to balance the colors and make my gray background look neutral and not blue, I had to adjust the white balance in Lightroom and add a lot of yellow to balance the blue. While when the sun was out, my color temperature was a lot more balanced, so I didn't have it wasn't either like super orange or super yellow or super blue. But in order to balance it, I had to increase the blues a little bit. So what you will hear often is cool down your white balance or warm up your white balance. And that means exactly if your color temperature in an overcast day is bluish, then you have to warm up your white balance, meaning you have to put the slider towards the warmer colors in order to balance the whites and the grays and the neutral tones in your images to give more realistic colors, because that's the important thing in food photography. If you only look at my subject, these are crab apples. Despite the fact that my two light conditions were so different, the color in the crab apple is very similar and it's very realistic because I balanced the white. I used the white balance to make realistic colors. How do we change the white balance? So you can change it either in camera or in post-production. So if you're shooting, and here's one of the reasons why you should always shoot RAW, because RAW will allow you to change your white balance in post. If you shoot JPEG, you will lose all of that information and you won't be able to adjust your colors as well. So this is a very important reason why you should always shoot RAW files. So, but let's take a step back. You can set up your white balance for your colors to be as realistic as possible directly in camera. So your camera, you can select auto white balance if you're shooting, for example, with light conditions that are very variable, like for example my crab apple example. Here I was shooting in auto white balance because the sun was being constantly covered by clouds. So if I had my color temperature or my white balance to cloudy and then all of a sudden the sun came out, my colors would be completely off. So in this scenario, I left my white balance on auto so that the camera could compensate for the change in light conditions and the change in color temperature. So I often personally choose to shoot in auto white balance and I shoot in RAW, so that what I can do is I can then adjust my white balance in Lightroom in a better way so that I have more control. However, you can also use the camera presets. There are many, so you can select cloudy, tungsten, all of these ones, daylight, cloudy, shade, tungsten, fluorescent, flash, and custom. This is a screenshot from Lightroom. However, these are basically also the camera presets that you can find in your camera. So in your white balance menu, you can select your light conditions so that the camera already does a little bit of white balance for you. Or if you want to be super precise and super geeky, you can set the color temperature in some cameras. So some cameras will allow you to set the actual color temperature of the light that you're shooting with. This is very difficult to do in natural light because, again, your light conditions change constantly. If your photo shoots last for an hour, then during that hour, the light will have changed quite a bit, and the color temperature will have changed. So if you're shooting with natural light, setting the color temperature in your camera is not the best option because often it changes. If you're shooting with artificial light, however, for example, flash has a constant color temperature, which means if you set your white balance in camera to the exact color temperature of your flash, perfetto. Like you've got it, you nailed it. So you don't need to do much adjustment than in Lightroom. Another cool thing is some cameras will allow you to customize your white balance. So there is a procedure that each camera has, and it's different from manufacturer to manufacturer. So have a look at your camera manual if you want to do this. This will allow you to customize your white balance based on the light conditions that hit your subject in that moment. Again, in natural light, this isn't like, I don't advise you to do this because the condition of the light change constantly. So if you customize your white balance to a certain color temperature and then the sun comes out or another cloud goes by, or the sun moves and it bounces off of a white building or something like that, then it would be off. So it's better, personally, I recommend keeping your camera in auto white balance, shoot in RAW, so that your camera does the best possible job with auto based on different light conditions that it encounters, and then you can fine tune it and tweak it in post. That's what I do, and I find is probably the safest option. But if you're shooting with artificial light, then you can choose the exact color temperature, or even custom white balance, which is generally a better option than auto. So auto for natural light, and color temperature or custom for artificial light. In post, so in Lightroom, you already have all of these presets. So if you shot on a cloudy day, you can just select cloudy and Lightroom will apply like a cloudy preset to balance your colors as well as it can, or select auto in Lightroom and it will assess what the light conditions were and therefore set your white balance to that. Or you can tweak it yourself. Just move the slider based on whether you want to cool down your image or warm it up. That is entirely up to you, and it's something that you can use creatively as well. To change the white balance in Lightroom, another powerful tool that you can use is the eyedropper thing. So if you select this one, which is, which is here on the top left-hand side of your white balance panel, what this allows you to do is it allows you to select a neutral color in your frame. So if you have something white, or like in my case, something that is gray, neutral gray, or black, then you can select the eyedropper, click on the background or the white. If you, for example, have a white napkin or a white plate or something, then you can click on that object that is a neutral color, and Lightroom will automatically adjust the white balance to make sure that that color is as neutral as possible. For example, the image on the left is what came out of camera, so with no white balance. And as you can see, it's a little bluish because I shot this on an overcast day, so it was cloudy. And as we saw previously, a cloudy day gives me a bluish light. So that's why I have this, my background is not gray, it's bluish. I can vouch the fact that this background should not be that color. And the crab apples also look a little bit cold. So I wanted to balance my colors here, and I used the eyedropper and I clicked on the background, and this is what Lightroom came out with. So it basically warmed up my white balance. It was blue, and by increasing the color temperature and moving the slider to the right towards the warmer tones, I warmed up my white balance. And personally, I find that the colors on the right are a lot more realistic. Now, you might have noticed that apart from the temperature slider, there's another slider under the color temperature slider, which is the tint slider. So it's got a green side and a magenta side. And this is basically, tint is another spectrum of the white balance. So white balance goes from yellow to blue, but also from magenta to green. So when you move the slider, what happens sometimes is that the slider won't be on the exact axis of blue yellow. It might be somewhere here. So it might be towards the magenta tint, or it might be somewhere here. So towards the green tint. So we have two axes here that we need to uh, take care of. Now, the good thing is that the magenta green tinge often don't apply to natural light. We only get magenta or green if we use artificial light, like tungsten, so light bulbs, fluorescent or LED lights. Luckily, natural light doesn't give us weird tints. However, be aware that sometimes your image might look a little greenish or a little magenta-ish. So there's also the other slider to look after and take care of, as well as the blue orange. There's also green magenta. What happens when we have two or more light sources? As we mentioned, different light sources emit light of different colors. So what happens if we have natural light mixed with, let's say, light coming from the ceiling, which is maybe like a light bulb? So natural light, let's say on a cloudy day, we're shooting in our kitchen and we have our kitchen light on. We have two light sources. One is very blue. The one coming from the window on a cloudy day is a very blue light coming onto our subject, while the light in the kitchen, being a light bulb, it's very warm. So these two will clash and mix and create something awful, like in this example shot that I took in a restaurant. So I shot this one in a restaurant, and as you can see, I was sitting in a warmer part of the restaurant with natural light coming from a window here from the top right corner. So this blue cast here on my image is really ugly. The oyster might be, like my subject might be balanced in terms of color. However, I will have this yucky blue light here. Because what happens is that in photography, you can only balance for one light source. So if you have two light sources and you decide to balance for the indoor lights, like in my case for the restaurant light, my window light, my natural light is really not balanced, and it basically comes out with the real color of the light. Vice versa, if I balanced my white balance on the blue light and turned this blue into, like if I warmed it up and turned it into more yellow color, then my oyster would have been super yellow and super orange. Because obviously you can only balance one light at a time. And this is why it's really, really important. It's key that you switch off every other light source in your studio space or wherever you're shooting, and that you only focus on shooting with one light source. So if you're shooting with the light coming from your window, oh my god, switch off all the other lights, everything else. You need to have only one light source, otherwise you will get mixed colors like this, and this will completely ruin your photos because it's then a little difficult to adjust in Lightroom. Not impossible, but very difficult and very time consuming as well. So switch off all the other lights or block them out. For example, what I do in restaurants sometimes, obviously I can't often switch off everything else because the chefs and the waiters they need to see what they're doing, so I can't ask the restaurant to just completely go dark. But what I'll do is I will bring a black piece of foam board or my black collapsible reflector 5-in-1 portable, and I will put it so that it covers and it blocks out all my other light sources, so that the only light source that hits my subject is from the window or from my flash, for example, sometimes. So block out all the other light sources, and failing everything, and I don't recommend this approach, but it is possible to do selective editing so that you basically, in Lightroom or in Photoshop sometimes, you use masks and selective adjustment brushes to just paint this blue area, for example, and adjust the white balance only on this blue area. Again, I don't recommend this approach because often it's easier said than done. Sometimes you will see some weird color casts still. It's not 100% accurate. So the best thing you can do is shoot with only one light source and block out or switch off everything else, so you don't have color casts and mixed colors in your image. Now, white balance is something you can use creatively as well. So it doesn't always have to be super strict. Oh, I'm shooting on a cloudy day, so my white balance needs to be this and da, da, da. No, you can use it creatively. For example, here I was shooting this Christmas light scene, and I was shooting this with flash. So I had full control over my color temperature, and the color temperature of the flash is around 5500 Kelvin, which is basically neutral. So this one here on the left is shot with flash white balance, so at 5500 Kelvin. The white is nicely balanced, the colors are balanced and everything. However, personally, I find this to be a little bit too warm. Why? Because I wanted to create a winter scene. And to create a winter scene, winter is a colder season, so you will have this colder white. So I tried adjusting my white balance and I cooled it down to 4200, which was okay, but then a little too cool. So I still wanted my biscuits to be nice and warm and like to look appetizing. And if cooling down my white balance so much made them a little pale and gloomy, and I didn't like that. So then I went for 4800. So the image on the right is the final image that I chose, because it's got a nice mix between the warmer tones in the biscuits that look appetizing, but also my background here is a little bluish, which is actually the right color for the background. In reality, it is bluish. And it conveys a little bit of winter, snowy feel that I wanted to convey. So even though the right, quote marks, the right white balance would be 5500 because I was shooting with flash, better white balance creatively and for my story is a little cooler, so it's around 4800. Just to say, you don't have to always go with what's technically correct. You can play around and use, obviously, you're a photographer, you're an artist, so use your creative side to tell the story that you want to tell. That's all for today. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Ciao!